What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Turn the Jets podcast. I'm your host, Will Parkinson, at WillPar11 on Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, the whole 9 yards. Joined by Sam Monson. I think this third or fourth time on the pod. We were through 2 days of training camp. Sam, how's your summer? How are we doing before we get talking some ball?
Yeah, doing okay. It's been a bit of a wild summer already. We had this giant heat wave here in Cincinnati, and my AC decided to crap out right in the middle of it. So I had a few days without any AC at all. Got up to 85 degrees in the house, and then the payoff for all that is I got to drop $7,000 on a new AC unit. So there have been some struggles in the heat of summer, but otherwise, pretty good.
Yeah, no, look. If you're trying to lose weight and you're fat like myself, 85 in the house is probably a good idea. I drive my wife nuts by having the house at 67 degrees. That's why you have multiple jobs, so you can afford for the AC to be as low as possible and then pay for it at the end of the month. But we're through 2 days of training camp here. Jets, obviously, the way the CBA works and training camp these days, you don't just hop into full pads and day one. There's, kind of glorified working through OTA, mini camp practices, ramping up. Today was a little bit longer for the Jets. Aaron Rodgers, by all accounts, was fantastic today. I want to get to that. I want to just start quickly with the Reddicks thing. There's some holdouts. It's very rare in today's NFL to hold out as opposed to hold in. We've seen Brandon Ayuk, right? CeeDee Lamb, Trent Williams, and Reddick, I believe, the three that are holding out. CeeDee Lamb's the only one that's a bigger story, in my opinion, because he's could forego a year of, accrued seasons and all that stuff in the new CBA. Trent Williams and Haason Reddicks are looking for their last big contracts in different ways. I get why they're holding out. What do you make of the Reddicks thing? Do you think it's as big of a deal as it's being made? Is it, classic Jets? Like, where do you land on this whole situation? Or is this like, we're not going to talk about this again in 3 days?
Well, I think you're right that we don't tend to see holdouts anymore because the kind of agreed rules have made it so financially painful to do that. So when we reach a stage where a guy is genuinely holding out, that immediately puts it into it's a big deal now because this is costing them like real money to go this far. So if it wasn't a big deal, they wouldn't be holding out. This would be a hold in. There might still be friction or whatever, but it wouldn't be where we are right now. So for it to even get this far, it's definitely a big deal. Then you get to there was always a little bit of weirdness about, when they traded for Haason Reddicks, then there were all these reports of like, they haven't actually talked to him since trading for him, like no contact whatsoever. I don't know there's varying degrees, I'm sure, of how much like interaction you have when you trade for players and things like that. It feels like at some point you should probably pick up the phone and at least welcome the guy to the building and say, hey, where are we? That was a weird kind of dynamic to start putting all those things out. I do feel like it's a situation that could be resolved, right? Like you say, he's clearly looking for a specific thing, even if we're not going to give him a giant new long-term payday. We can move some money around a little bit like Amari Cooper with the Browns, right? They effectively guaranteed the last year of his contract. They gave him another $5 million worth of incentives that he could potentially hit, and he still gets to hit free agency next year. Everybody's happy. They get their guy back in the building. So it feels like it's definitely, there's a solution to this we can reach. But the fact that this has reached this far, whereas Amari Cooper's didn't, that is a significant, Rubicon that has been crossed, I think.
Yeah, the one thing that's different than, even Jordan Love, I know I joked this morning. I decided not to tweet it, but I almost did the meme where it's like, guy without their shirt on, and then there's the Lizzo meme and whatever, and it's like empowering versus being a fat ass and whatever. And then, there's the Rodgers holding out of minicamp for 2 days to go to Egypt versus Jordan Love on 4 days in a training camp not being there. It's like the way it's, obviously going to be talked about. That's a whole nother story, and it's not really worth the drama of that. But I agree with you. I think that there's pretty clear way to get this fixed. I always thought the Danielle Hunter contract, if they wanted to go the extension route, was probably the best way. You guarantee Reddicks here for 2 years. He walks when he's 31. You pay Jermaine Johnson. It's kind of a clear, like, you move the money from one guy to the next, and that's what healthy franchises do. You have veterans that are really good, and when they become too expensive, you have rookies that come in and you can pay those guys. So you look at Khalil Mack at $19 million this year. Amari Cooper, Reddicks at $14.5. When you guarantee the deal, it's more for optics for the agent and the player and stuff. Like, if Reddicks plays this year, it's guaranteed anyway. So,
right.
And as you mentioned, incentives. I don't think he's going to get up to $25 million in incentives. Maybe the Jets put in there first team All-Pro and defensive player of the year and a bunch of stuff that, like, maybe he gets to, but like likely doesn't. I just the fact that he's a guy who's never played a snap for the Jets makes this one a little bit weirder than obviously Lamb and Trent Williams and guys like that. But obviously, as you mentioned, Amari Cooper, like Cooper was really good for the Browns the last couple of years. It's not like this isn't year one. That trade still looks terrible for Dallas,
Right.
in my opinion. But whatever, that's a whole nother story. I just think this needs to get solved at some point. And in terms of leverage, this has been the big debate. I'm curious where you land on this. I feel like Reddick has a lot of leverage here because the Jets need him and they traded for him. Like they can't just like not have him play. And I know he's losing money, but he's going to get paid in the end. Do you feel like that, or a lot of people feel like the Jets have leverage? I don't really. I guess they both do in some senses. Who has more? Do you think?
I think Reddick has more, but you're right. Like the rules with the fines, it makes it difficult now because when these guys hold out, you work on the basis that, okay, whenever we get a deal done, we need to kind of pay back the fine, right? That's that now has to go into the negotiation and say, we're not just trying to find him this amount of money in a vacuum. We need to find him that amount of money, and we need to kind of make up for the amount where we have to fine him by the rules of the CBA. So when you reach this stage where it's costing money, it's getting more difficult to get the deal done the longer this drags, because you've got this extra thing now of having to fine him this sum of money that you can't get around. So it does become awkward, and it does become quite difficult. But you're right, like they can't be in a situation where they don't resolve this and they just traded for a guy when they could have, potentially paid a Bryce Huff and kept him in the building. And instead they trade for Reddick, they bring him in, and seemingly weren't necessarily aware that this was on the horizon, seemed to have been to a degree blindsided by this, or at least didn't get out ahead of it by not, having contact with him for so long. It's not a good look, right? Like that, let's put it that way. So from that perspective, he definitely does have a lot of leverage, but the CBA has been set up so that the teams have a lot more leverage in these situations now than they used to because of the fine. So it's a weird situation where both teams actually have quite a lot of leverage, which can make the deal quite difficult to get done.
Yeah, as of today, since Reddick missed today, he's now lost $350,000 this offseason. It's a fuck ton of money. Like I don't care how wealthy you are. That's a lot of money. And I was speaking with obviously mutual friend Brad Spielberg about this. I was curious because obviously a lot of times the rookies on a rookie deal when they hold in as a Brandon Ayuk or a CeeDee Lamb, like they usually get paid back. The veterans don't always get paid back. So there's he's losing legit real money, and I know he's fighting for that third contract. I get all of that. It's tough, and it's a situation where like the Jets have kind of generally been kind of out of the news for a while outside of the Rodgers Egypt thing. Like it has been kind of quiet, which is random with the Jets, which is not as rare with the Jets, I should say. And it's just the Reddick thing is just another thing where it's like, come on, man, like get this solved, get ahead of this. Right. There's no reason
and
this should be a thing.
Like that very quickly becomes real money, right? Like now you're saying, okay, it's $350,000. That's still serious money, but theoretically, if you give them the right deal, it's a drop in the ocean, right? But we only need a couple more days before that now becomes like a real problem of bridging the gap between wherever the Jets are and wherever he is. Like you now need to add $1 million to that because of the amount that he just lost in fines. So again, the longer this drags out, the harder it is to get that deal bridged.
Yeah, look, I think they'll be full pads on Monday. If he's not there by Monday, it'll be over $500,000 this offseason. I mean, that's a lot of money. So I want to talk about what's on the field today. And again, I want to get to just kind of some of these things projecting forward. I guess I'm going to pose the question like this. Rodgers, obviously, good yesterday in the beginning, red zone period, first day back. I'm not putting a lot of stock in him. First of all, camp practices, it's hard to put too much stock into everything. But today, from all accounts, like peak Aaron Rodgers, moving around, hitting, deep ball, short passes, red zone, all that stuff. I think no one was questioning the arm talent. Me and you talked about this a couple of months ago. I think it's more of the mobility aspect. And from all accounts, he actually has moved around a little bit and done some stuff. He's not 2010 Aaron Rodgers where he's running for 4 or 5 touchdowns a year. Is there anything Rodgers will do this offseason, or this preseason, I should say, that it's going to change the way you view the Jets? Or is it kind of like, I just got to see it on the field? I know it's a loaded question, but I feel like you get excited about today, right? First play action, offensive line looks good, like ones-on-ones, hits Garrett Wilson. And it's easy to get excited, but is it hard to get too excited until you see it week 1, Monday Night Football in San Francisco?
I don't think it's even necessarily seeing it live. My concern is it's not even that he's more likely, like he's going to be encumbered somehow. I think obviously the arm talent is still fine. I don't even think he's going to be like physically burdened or encumbered or look like not mobile. Like mobility, I don't think is going to be affected either. The concern I would have, and this is where it gets difficult because there's really no way of dispelling that, is does it make him more prone to getting other injuries that are like compensating for an Achilles that might not be 100%, right? Like, are we a little bit more likely to pop a quad, right? Or to tweak the other calf or a hamstring or something, to go like something that's somewhere interconnected with all of these lower body things that ultimately traces back to the Achilles. And you're just not going to know until that either happens or doesn't. So I think Rodgers may well look 100%, and that could be a bigger percentage. It's just lurking in the background, like ready to snap randomly in week 7. And now Rodgers is down for a month that he wouldn't have been down for, but for the Achilles. That I think is my concern about a Rodgers coming back at his age from this Achilles injury. I think the arm talent is going to look exactly the same. I suspect the mobility is going to look pretty much the same. It's that sort of hidden, insidious, like sinister threat that maybe he's just a little bit more likely to get injured in some other, what feels like a random way, but is ultimately connected to that Achilles that we just don't know from the outside.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page as you. And something, Mike Tannenbaum brought this up on Get Up, I guess yesterday, and everyone kind of disagreed with him. And I actually agree with him. He's like, I want to see Rodgers kind of take one or two, like not hits in a big hit way, but like just go to the ground and get up, like get chased out of the pocket in a scrimmage and like feel good about himself and be like, all right, like if I move around, there's live bullets kind of flying a little bit. I agree with that. I just think, I don't know, when I came back from a leg injury, again, I'm not Aaron Rodgers, Division III college football, but like I was pretty damn nervous when there's other people running around me because I'm like, if I make one wrong step and it takes a while to get over that, that's that mental block. And that, as you mentioned, you see guys in soccer specifically come back from a hamstring and then the other hamstring. Like that's the stuff more so. I'm worried about the Achilles. I mean, he went to the best doctor in the world for it. I'm not like, that's not what I'm not like, freaking out.
But I think, I think you're right though. Like, it almost doesn't matter what level you're talking about in terms of playing. I think the first time you get a major injury where you become aware of the fact that your body is not bulletproof, right? And for Rodgers in particular, because that happened effectively, it wasn't, I mean, it was a sort of non-contact injury, right? It was like his Achilles got planted in the ground and it just snapped on him, right? He's gone his entire life without ever thinking that was a possibility. It never occurs to you that there's a stress you can put on your body where a tendon or a ligament or whatever, it just says, nope, not doing it, not happening today. And it snaps and it goes. And it's always different from that point on. Like there's no way around it. And maybe you can get over that and you can get back to being the guy you were. But that changes your mind fundamentally the first time it happens to you. And maybe with Rodgers, it's the Achilles. Maybe with you, it was something else. Like my ankle went randomly one time. And it's like from that moment on, you're always aware that it can happen. Like it's different. It just changes what it definitely, that lives in the back of your head from that point onward. So you're right. It's definitely, you can be 100%. You can be physically doing everything you used to do, but that's now there in his brain in a way it wasn't before last season. And that might affect him. And so, it's even independent of like see him take a couple of hits and get over that, like just seeing whether that impacts him, right? Whether he's a slightly different player because maybe that's living in the back of his brain now when it didn't used to.
Yeah, no, 100%. I wanted to ask you, we're kind of having this debate back and forth with some of the Jets beat guys in terms of, who the Jets can't afford to lose this year, who their kind of key guys are. And obviously Rodgers, I think it goes out saying, so we're going to take him out of the conversation. In terms of guys they can't afford to lose, I put like Tyron Smith's up there, but I also think in some ways Tyron Smith, because they drafted Olu Fashanu, like he becomes almost I don't want to say a luxury. I'm not like saying, but in some sense from a Jets perspective, like they have not had depth at tackle in such a long time, and all that type of stuff. I think CJ Mosley is one of the guys they can't afford to lose, and I know he's not the same player he was in terms of athletic ability 2 or 3 years ago, but like the way he controls that defense. And there's little spurts when he's been out of the game, like they're just not the same defense. Is there 2 or 3 guys for you who like him and Mosley and Garrett Wilson to me are guys that like, yes, the Jets could be successful without theoretically, but play such a pivotal role in terms of the room they're in, lack of depth, etc. Who are the guys for you, maybe 2 or 3 that like or like I can't lose these guys for more than like a week or two if the Jets want to do a lot of things they're kind of trying to hope to do.
Yeah, I mean, look, you're right. They built in contingency with the Tyron Smith thing. So, theoretically, if Tyron Smith goes down, which let's face it, he will at some point. I mean, the guy
Can you
almost
get more
always
than
gets
10
hurt.
games out
Right.
of him? You'd be pretty happy with.
Yeah. So the chances are at some point Fashanu's going to have to play this season. That's why he's there. So you're right. They build in contingency there. I think the places where there aren't good contingencies, Garrett Wilson, if he goes down, that receiving core immediately changes from the, like, looking at it. It's like, whoa, that's a problem now. Garrett Wilson's there. It's like, okay, that's fine. This is a good group. We've got depth. We've got different positions. But if you take Wilson out of it, it's like, that's like a problematic receiving core. So him being in or out of that lineup completely changes how you view that group. I think Sauce Gardner, if he's not there, that's a problem. They actually have some depth at cornerback, so it's not quite the same as receiver, but he's just such a difference maker for that group. Like, you're talking about probably the best corner in football. Good as a man cover guy, good in zone, like, just changes the tone of that entire defense. If he's not in there, it's a different unit. And then Quinnen Williams, I think, is another one that absolute wrecking ball inside, the only wrecking ball they have inside. And they've got depth along the defensive line, but it's on the edges. You take Quinnen out of the middle, whole defense, I think, is different. So those would be the three guys, I think, that if any one of those guys goes down for any period of time, I think the outlook of the entire team changes.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you. I think that's why I want to get to kind of stock up, stock down here in a minute. But and I asked Trevor about this yesterday, and we've talked about this on the show obviously a lot just because of the Devontae stuff. There's the Devontae, like, are you hey, to week 4? I don't think it's happening now. I know there's a lot of people and Boomer Esiason claims it's happening before the season. Maybe it does. I could be totally wrong. I don't see the Raiders moving off of them already. It's week 4 or 5 or 6, whatever it is. The Jets are 4-1 and the Raiders are 0-5. Like, I see it. It's very plausible it happens. Devontae has no problem talking and getting his way a little bit, obviously, as we've seen. Does that type of move make even more sense to you, knowing that receiver feels like a position where the Jets, if you just trot out their top 4, you can make an argument it's a pretty damn good group, fully healthy, right? Mike Williams, if he's fully healthy, and if Corley takes that next step, and Allen Lazard's even somewhat of the player he was in Green Bay. Like, he's a pretty good wide receiver 3. It just, he was never a 2 or even a 1.
Right.
But Devontae, Garrett Wilson, and like Corley, Lazard, and Mike Williams is like, you could argue Devontae, Garrett Wilson's the best duo in football. Like, that's how good that duo could be. So is it worth it to you? I know we mentioned, sometimes it's that mortgage the future versus not. I happen to think if you're in a nice spot there, like, good way to protect your quarterback is have teams not, in Breece Hall, is to have teams have to play drop 7 every time. What do you feel on the Devontae thing? I know it's kind of projecting a little bit, but it feels like Devontae said himself, he's getting moved. He's going to the Jets, and the Jets have been pretty loud about their interest in Devontae.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely moves the needle for them. I think it's one of those moves that is genuinely mortgaging the future for the present, which doesn't mean to say it's not a good idea because the Jets are one of the most sort of all-in teams in recent years, right? This is a team clearly working to a pretty short time scale. They're not, this is not a 5-10 year project. This is a however long Aaron Rodgers is here is however long we've got. So let's make it count. So I think it's entirely plausible. Like, if they get to that point in the season where they're like, no, we're here, we can win this. I mean, Rodgers talked about it, right? There's 8 teams going into a season in any given year that could win a Super Bowl. And the Jets are one of those this year. And I think that's reasonable. If they still think that 5-6 weeks into the season, Davante Adams is the kind of move that could cement that could, only enhance that ability. So I think it's definitely plausible. If they get to that point in the season where they're like, we're not actually as good as we looked. I don't know that the Davante Adams thing is going to make the difference this year. Then they probably hold fire on it and just write it off. But I think it's definitely plausible that if they feel like they're in the mix, and you're right, if the Raiders are not, if the Raiders have decided they could cash in, it's a deal that could work for both sides.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page as you. If you had to buy stock in one offensive and one defensive player in the Jets this year, they could already be a really good player and they could just take the next leap. It could be a guy that, I feel like Quinn Williams, we just still don't talk about enough of how good he is. I feel the same way about like Dexter Lawrence and some of these guys. I feel like we always talk about Chris Jones, and like there's other couple of guys right after Chris Jones, who you could argue are just as good. If you wanted to buy stock in one offensive, one defensive player, could be a guy trying to take a leap to be a starter. It could be a starter taking a leap to be a Pro Bowl level player. Who would you put your claim on July 25th?
I feel like we might see a bounce back season from Mike Williams. Yeah, I think everyone's focusing on the injuries and the history and the durability questions, and I think we're kind of buying low at that point because he missed most of last season, and he does get hurt a lot. Like it's I'm not dismissing injuries as a concern, but because he missed most of last year, it seems like everyone's like, he only ever plays a couple of games and then he's out. Like he usually plays.
Hey,
he's plays good when he
injury report. It's annoying, but he plays.
Yeah. And he plays pretty well when he's playing. It's just that last year we saw like the worst case scenario of what happens when he gets hurt early and misses almost the whole year. So you put Mike Williams with Aaron Rodgers. I feel like that actually has a lot of exciting potential there. And then I have to, on the defensive side, I've got to stick to my guns with Will McDonald. I love that guy coming out. I think it was a great landing spot for him. The pathway is there for him to now become Bryce Huff, and do that, become the sort of the situational, incredibly efficient, one-dimensional, if you like, but like the situational rusher and make a real impact. So I'm gonna stick to that pre-draft priors and say this is Will McDonald season.
Shame on you. No, I'm just kidding. I'm gonna buy stock in two friends of the show. I'll buy stock in Tyler Conklin and Michael Carter. I think Conklin's a guy who's had pretty productive, like top 15 level production in terms of catches and yards and things like that. Just the touchdowns haven't followed. And when you play with Zach Wilson and Trevor Siemian and Tim Boyle and stuff, that's kind of what tends to happen. So Rodgers' favorite tight ends. We saw Robert Tonyan 2 years ago, who I don't think is anywhere near as good of a player as Conklin, have 10 touchdowns. It's like 50 catches, 600 yards, 10 touchdowns. If you told me that Conklin's like their red zone guy, along with a Mike Williams, wouldn't be shocked. And Michael Carter's a guy who a couple of penalties have taken away, huge interceptions, the Chiefs game, the Patriots game, etc. He's one of, if not the best, I think he was rated in the top 14 or 15 of just corners in general by PFF in terms of analytics. He's really good. The tape, he's really good. Doesn't have the turnovers, but again, that's how you kind of feel with Sauce and DJ Reed. Both were like, they're all awesome in different varying levels, obviously. They just don't have the turnovers right now, and you expect if they're winning some games, they should get a lot more notoriety, Reed and Carter specifically. So I'll buy stock on those two guys. How do you feel on those two?
No, Carter's a really good player, absolutely. I think you're right. Like, once you're outside of the top sort of real difference-making tight ends, when you're not talking about Travis Kelce or George Kittle, I think to a large extent, tight end is kind of a product of the quarterback. Like you can create a lot of production out of average NFL tight ends, and Rodgers is absolutely capable of doing that to Conklin. So yeah, I like that as well.
In terms of two guys, I hate doing the negative stuff, but if you had to kind of feel like they're kind of these two guys are kind of getting either overhyped or like, hey, this stock might not be quite as I'm not as all in on their stock as I'll start here, and so I just talked about DJ Reed a little bit, and it's not that I don't think Reed's a good player. I just think that like he's kind of in that he's been underrated for a really long time. That now I almost feel like he's getting almost a little slightly overrated. Like I think he's the third. I think he's the third best guy in that room. He's like I was trying to find a good soccer example of this, but like there's these guys. Like I'll use Jonathan Tom. I'm a Bayern fan or whatever. Like he's always been a solid player, but like. Just because now all of a sudden he was underrated for a really long time. Now it's like he's worth $50 million. And it's like, no, he's not. Like he's a good player, and like just let him be that. Reed, because of the contract, because of being opposite Sauce and Michael Carter, I think a lot of times like he gets a lot more targets. So he's like, you talk about him more. I think he's a really good corner. He's a top 20 or 25 corner, whatever. I just don't think he's quite as good as that top 10 level at the moment, at least. And I think sometimes he gets talked about a little bit like that of like the Jets have 3 top 10 guys. Like they have 2 top 10-ish, whatever. And then offensively, I kind of I go back and forth with like, I think Brees is one of the 2 or 3 best backs in the league. And this is not saying that I'm not extremely high on Brees. I am. I just am almost nervous that if he has like 1,600 total yards and 10 touchdowns, people are going to be like, that wasn't even that impressive. And it's like, no, man, like that was awesome. And like he'd break a lot of records for the Jets all the time. Like, I just think like the expectations have gotten to the point now where it's like him and Christian McCaffrey and Bijan and Jahmyr Gibbs, like 2 of the 4 are going to be all pros. And it's like, can't Brees like just be really awesome? And then if he again, I'm not buying low on him or saying the stock's too high. I just, again, it's one of those like Brees's expectation now is all of a sudden he has to be one of the two best backs in the league or he's not going to have a good year. And like, I just think that's kind of bullshit for a guy who's in year 3 and he's been fully healthy once. Like, I just like let him like be good for a full year and then we can get to that point.
Yeah, if I was
I'm going to get crushed by Jets fans now for saying I bought Brees is brutal.
In the backfield, like I did not like Braylon Allen as a prospect. I think he would be a guy that I would sort of highlight as like, I think they drafted the better running back later in the draft, right? Like, so if this, and look, it might not matter because Breece Hall should be their every down guy. He should get the workload. But I would not have particularly high expectations for Braylon Allen. Also on offense, like John Simpson, I think they needed to overhaul the offensive line. They needed to make some investments. They weren't the only team that did this year, but John Simpson hasn't been a particularly good NFL offensive lineman in multiple different spots now. So I don't know how much he's actually moving the needle in terms of repairing that offensive line. The one defensive player, I kind of like this as a gamble or as a signing. Javon Kinlaw, when they signed him, like last year was the first flashes of Javon Kinlaw, the first round talent that we thought he was. It still wasn't great. It was still more flashes than substance. And, potentially he has a pretty big role on this defensive line now. I don't know how much we're actually going to see of that, whether it's injuries, whether it's just inconsistency and never actually showing a whole season's worth of that first round talent. But I guess Kinlaw would be a guy that maybe is being a little bit overrated now relative to what he's actually going to produce.
Yeah, I'm on the same page as you again. I just want to clarify. I am not saying Breece and DJ Reed are not good players. I feel like there's an unfair expectation on Breece that like he has to just be this top 2 back. And the Simpson one is a good call out. I think if anyone of that starting 5 this year, if you see like the Jets move Olu at all, I don't think they'll do this. But again, Rodgers did speak at this right after he got drafted and was like, yeah, maybe he'll get some reps at guard. Again, this won't happen during camp. But if you told me like week 13, the Jets are like, hey, we're going to go try to go win the division and get the 2 seed. And like we feel like we're right there. And like Simpson's kind of holding us back a little bit. You said, hey, we're going to put Olu at left guard and we're going to just say like, be a good athlete for like 6 weeks and we'll figure it out later. It wouldn't shock me. Like that's not the craziest thing I could think of. I want to get to a couple fun NCAA and soccer things in a second here. Gun to your head, theoretically, obviously. In the middle of camp's 2 days old and the whole 9 yards. Where do you think you're going to settle with the Jets in terms of record or expectations? Rodgers said goals New Orleans. I personally think 10 or 11 wins in the divisional round is like a pretty good. If we get to that, it's a successful year somewhat. If we achieve more, amazing. If we achieve less, coach and GM might be not here next year. Are you on a similar to me, more closer to Rodgers? Are you closer to, Kevin Wildes on FS1 and Nick Wright and think the Jets are going to go 7-10 and suck? Like where do you sit with that?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it all is contingent on how much Rodgers plays, right? So if we get a full season of Rodgers, I do think that the Jets are legitimate contenders. I felt the same way a year ago, right? Rodgers on the Jets makes this team a legitimate Super Bowl contender. Now, the problem with that is the AFC is still loaded, right? There's still a ton of teams in the AFC that are legitimate Super Bowl contenders. And it's entirely plausible to basically become this year's version of the Buffalo Bills, where you win your division, you look really good, and then you run up against Kansas City or whoever in the playoffs, and that's all she wrote. And like, is that a successful season? Is that a failure? That's where I struggle with it. So I would expect the Jets, they might not even win the division because Buffalo is still there, because, Miami is still there. It's a tough division right away. Expectations for me are playoff team. Once you get to the playoffs, I think almost all bets are off. It depends who you're matching up against, where you are, like what the deal is, who you've got, who you've lost through injuries. Like Miami went into Kansas City in freezing ass cold conditions with no edge rushers last year. Like, was that a fair reflection of who Miami actually was last season? Or did they simply not have any pass rushers anymore? In addition to it being cold, it's tough. Playoffs, I think, is a minimum expectation. Once they get to the playoffs, I think they are talented enough that they are contenders, but that doesn't mean they even win a playoff game just by the nature of the AFC this year. Like, that's how loaded the thing is. And that's really tough to sort of, when you're actually analyzing success and failure, realistically, the only measuring stick is, do you win playoff games or not? but that's not necessarily a fair yardstick of how good you were.
Yeah, a couple good examples of kind of what you're mentioning there. I'll use one Yankees example and one Jets example. The Yankees, 2017, kind of a year or two ahead of the window. They go to the Game 7 of the ALCS. Everyone's like, kind of, damn, it lost, but like, we'll be right back. We showed so many signs next year we're all in. 2018, the Yankees make the playoffs again. They go up against the Red Sox, best team in 20 years, and like, they looked like shit and lost in 4 games. And it's like, oh, this team sucked. And in reality, the 2018 team won more games than 2017, whole 9 yards. 2009 Jets, kind of upstart, more of like, we hadn't seen it yet in a little bit. They go the conference title game and lose. They're winning at halftime against Peyton Manning and like the prime Colts. They lose, and it was not a failure because you're like, all right, they'll be back. 2010, they go and lose at Pittsburgh, and in the last 2 minutes, and you're like, that sucked. Like, what just happened? So it's all of like matchups, as you mentioned, kind of where you view the team and who's carrying the team too, right? If it's all the young guys, you feel pretty good. If you're the younger Bills when they lose to the Chiefs, and then a couple years later they lose to the Chiefs, and you're like, damn, did the window close? Right? I feel like that's kind of how you measure it a little bit.
Well, yeah, I think the NFL has a really difficult time in understanding when to change something and when the answer is to just keep knocking on the door, right? And you can stay, in the NFL without going to other sports. So there are other sports where, like my team, Leinster rugby team, they've lost 3 consecutive European Cup finals, right? And I don't think anybody knows whether the answer is we need fundamental sweeping changes because look, they've come up short 3 straight times, or whether you're like, they've been the second best team in Europe for 3 straight occasions. Like, that's a pretty high bar to be clearing. So, if you go back to the Buffalo Bills in the 90s, right, 4 straight Super Bowls, what should the takeaway be at the end of the 4th Super Bowl, right? Do you go, nobody's ever done this before. Nobody's ever gone to 4 straight Super Bowls. We're already in crazy rare air. This is like almost unparalleled success. And yeah, okay, we haven't won one yet, but the answer isn't to change everything. Nobody's ever been to 4 straight. We just have to get over the hump. Like, it's individual game flow or whatever. It's just freakish that we haven't won one of these things. Or do you say, no, 4 straight Super Bowl defeats? This is evidence of like an inherent endemic problem. We need to change things. Otherwise, and we've seen, 49ers took a long time to get over the hump, right? They finally got there. I think it's really difficult to come away with like even understanding where you are when only one team wins the Super Bowl every year, right?
Yeah.
For the last 3 years, or for the last 2 years, rather, the only team that knows they don't need to change things are Kansas City because they've won the Super Bowls. Everyone else can come out of the season thinking, we need to change something. We didn't get it done. We need to get over the hump. But I don't know that that's true for a lot of those teams, or if they do everything again, if they reload and have another swing at it, this time they connect, this time they beat Kansas City, this time Miami doesn't lose all their edge rushers late in the year. It's just a different year and the results go differently.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page as you. I want to get one soccer, one NCAA question before we wrap here. I've now kind of fully entrenched myself in NCAA 25. I know it's not a perfect game. I just think it's cool that it's back and like we're getting to enjoy it, and it's just fun and the graphics are really good, and like it's obviously impossible to play on the road at some of these stadiums if you're on the most difficult mode. Like, I feel like I literally am an idiot. Thoughts on the game before I get one quick soccer question before we wrap here.
Yeah, it's fun. So obviously nobody's played NCAA for years. I haven't even played Madden for a long time, but the game kind of tempted me and a couple of friends back into it. Ben Stockwell, who's the head of analysis at PFF, we were playing a couple of games online, and it was like, it should have been content somewhere. It was like 2 people, neither of whom have any idea what they're doing. Like, we couldn't kick the ball because it's a totally new, the kicking system. It's like neither one of us could complete a field goal, kickoff, or punt. And we're just inept 2 complete boomers trying to operate this game for the first time. But it was fun. Like, I've now spooled up a dynasty and a path to glory thing, where you control the player. I'm going to kind of alternate between the 2 of them so I don't get sick of either one of the approaches. But yeah, I think it's good fun so far. And definitely a kind of welcome return to the consoles.
I fully agree. I've not asked you about this. We have not talked that much England soccer. I vehemently root against England with a passion. Like, I hate watch them. I've rarely ever hate watched any other team. I hate watch Real Madrid a lot just because I think they've corruptly beaten us in a lot of different European semifinals, whatever. That's a whole nother discussion that we can do in another podcast. You're watching the European Championships, you're watching the final. Are you cheering for joy, saying like, "Hey, England's about to lose here"? Were you like, I don't really want to see Spain win? Like, where'd you land during that? Because watching them choke again and Harry Kane, because even though he plays for my club, choking in another final was quite glorious.
Yeah, so my relationship with the England football team is complicated because I'm Irish, so immediately you have to hate them. But I lived in England for a long time when I was younger, so you kind of warm to them a bit. But the problem is not so much with the English team, with the players, with the coach.
It's the
It's
fans.
the English people become obnoxious when they win, right? So I settled on a while. I like seeing them do quite well, but I don't want them to win it, right? So I would like to see them get to quarter, semi, finals. The finals a bit too close. That's a little, that's risky, right? But if they went out in the semifinal every year, I think I'd be quite happy. It's like I'd like to see a lot of those players I like. They either play for, I'm a Liverpool fan, so they either play for Liverpool, they play for other teams. Like I like a lot of their individual players.
Or they're Irish. Yeah.
Right. So I like a lot of their players. I kind of like seeing them do well, but I don't want to see them win the thing because the fan base is just obnoxious. And it's interesting because they don't understand collectively that, Ireland, Scotland, wherever, that they hate the English. So when they lose, you get this kind of double wave. You get like an initial relief of, it was great. They didn't win it. We're okay. And then you get the reaction like a day or two later where the English media and the English fans are like, I don't understand. Why wouldn't they like us? Why do the Irish people hate England? You're like, if you don't understand that, that's its own problem,
Yeah. You're asking a question that if you didn't understand, you probably shouldn't be asking it. I obviously appreciate you taking some time. We will obviously catch up during the season. A lot of stuff going on at PFF. I know got this fantasy stuff coming out. PFF Ultimate, PFF Plus, however you want to phrase it. Anything I'm missing there before we wrap here?
Well, let me give you. I'll give you a promo code that we can drop, so I can get you 25% off PFF Plus this season. We're getting a fantasy season, so NFL Show 25. NFL Show 25 gets you 25% off. 25% off what, you might ask? Well, I have to ask people because it's fantasy season. I'm not a big fantasy guy, but other people are. The first thing you're going to get is Nathan Yankee's fantasy rankings, which apparently have been the most accurate out there anywhere, according to Fantasy Pros, for the last 70 weeks. So basically the most accurate fantasy rankings you're going to find anywhere. You also get access to the fantasy mock draft simulator. So if you've used PFF's mock draft sim for like the real draft, kind of the same thing. You can import your league. You can practice your fantasy draft with all the realistic settings and basically run yourself through all the scenarios based off where you're going to be picking, all those kinds of things. So all that kind of stuff, 25% off NFL Show 25.
Yeah, PFF NFL Pod. Make sure you guys are following Sam, and we'll be back on the feed on Saturday. We'll talk a little more camp, and then I'll have live pods from camp on Monday and Tuesday. Appreciate you for listening, and we'll talk to you guys on Saturday.